Welcome to Quantum Potential, a podcast dedicated to curiosity, discovery, and the bold new ideas shaping our future. I'm Sibel Raver, Provost of Vanderbilt University. Today's conversation brings together themes that are at the very core of my values as a leader and at the intersection of scholarship and lived experience. We're exploring how individuals and organizations can cultivate meaning, purpose, and the conditions that allow human potential to flourish. Why does this matter as we define what universities must become in the 21st century? Universities are places where knowledge advances, but they are also places where individuals grow, reflect, and chart their paths forward. I think about this often in my role as Vanderbilt's Chief Academic Officer, where I help shape both our academic direction and the social and residential life that defines our community. That dual responsibility makes today's conversation especially meaningful for our Vanderbilt community and for me personally as a leader in higher education. And that is why I am so delighted to welcome you, Arthur Brooks, a thought leader, scholar, best-selling author, and professor, and a person who hosts an incredibly popular podcast, by the way, whose work explores the science of happiness, leadership, and human flourishing. Arthur's career has been nothing short of extraordinary. He served on the faculties of both Harvard Business School and Harvard Kennedy School. He holds a PhD in public policy analysis and has earned both graduate and undergraduate degrees in economics. He previously led one of Washington's most influential think tanks, the American Enterprise Institute, as its president. He's a prolific and influential voice in the national conversation about success and well-being. Arthur has delivered more than 3,000 lectures, which if you can just think about that is just amazing, around the world, and authored 13 books, including 5 national bestsellers. He's profoundly shaped how we think about achievement, purpose, and happiness. And we are so honored to welcome you, Arthur.
Thank you, Sibel.
I'm also thrilled to share that you will soon be joining Vanderbilt as a member of our faculty.
I'm thrilled about that too.
So
I can't
awesome.
wait. Yeah.
Incredible.
This is the place to be.
Thank you so much and welcome.
I can't wait. Thank you.
Great. So let's begin with your research and your writing. You've spent years studying happiness as something measurable and teachable, not something simply that we think about in philosophical terms, but truly grounded in science. Which as a developmental psychologist who studies, neuroendocrine function, I just love that you're bringing affective neuroscience to that discussion. For listeners encountering this work for the first time, how do you define happiness? What do people most often misunderstand about happiness?
Yeah. Happiness is something that everybody wants. Not everybody acts like they want it, but people want to be happier. And that's something that philosophers have been talking about forever. The trouble is the thing that we most want seems like the thing that we actually can't get. And that paradox itself has actually been the center of a lot of theology, for example.
Yeah.
So religions that believe that there's a great and blissful afterlife will say that evidence of that afterlife, of heaven, is the fact that we want something and we feel like we can get it, but we can't get it here. So it's sort of like thirst is evidence of the existence of water.
So fascinating.
But it's only been recently that the merging of theology and philosophy, but also with modern neuroscience and behavioral science, that we've been able to quantify what these ideas are. And that's what's been the most exciting thing in my career. I mean, I'm a behavioral scientist by background, studying mostly how people interact with government and behave in weird ways as citizens. But I realized along the way, as I got a little bit older, that I wanted to study what was most important to me. And I needed to retrain in areas that I didn't have an academic background. So I went back to study more neuroscience and more philosophy. And that gave me a thrilling intellectual background to retool my skill set in ways that are so exciting. And I realized that in so doing, we could kind of triangulate across these different literatures to illuminate more about the secrets of human happiness beyond what anybody would have even thought of 50 years ago.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time. It's an exciting time. Everybody's talking about AI and vaccines, and the real vanguard is human happiness.
So great. And I love to just open up for a minute the point that you made early, that idea of allowing ourselves to be happy. Is that because we place achievement on one end of a continuum and happiness on another, and there's some virtue to the notion of the grind of suffering?
Well, it is true. And one of the great misunderstandings that we have about happiness, and back to your original question, what do we get wrong about it? We think it's a feeling. Happiness isn't an emotion. emotions are evidence of happiness, like the smell of your turkey is evidence of your Thanksgiving dinner. And so understanding that happiness is something more tangible than that has sort of macronutrients. So I talk an awful lot about the elements of that, but also that it's more of a direction than a destination, at least in this life, depending on your views. That's an important thing to keep in mind as well. People make other mistakes about it that have everything to do with our biological evolutionary tendencies. So one of the biggest mistakes that people who are strivers, hardworking people, successful people make is that they believe, because Mother Nature has kind of programmed us to believe, that if we have enough worldly success, money, power, honor, that happiness will come for free. And that's quite wrong. And so one of the biggest mistakes of the most high achieving people in the world is that they think that if they get worldly success, happiness will come for free. The first thing I tell my classes, they're the leaders of tomorrow,
right,
is that you need to shoot for happiness and then you'll be successful enough. And of course, for strivers, what makes them panic is that last word, enough.
Yes.
And so the whole secret is figuring out what that means.
Yeah. I mean, that whole notion of delaying gratification,
right,
that it's a consequence rather than a correlate or something that travels alongside or even drives success, right?
Absolutely. And, it's an interesting thing because people who work their whole lives to be special rather than happy, they wind up becoming really, really miserable. And that's not how I want my students to wind up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you gave a great set of antidotes to the notion that worry is something that we just have to shoulder.
Yeah.
Right. You want to talk a little bit about worry? I love that idea that, what was it? I think you said somewhere in the middle of the book that 91% of the things that we worry about don't ever come to pass.
That's right. That's right. So a lot of people struggle with anxiety and stress and worry, and they're all related to fear. Fear is a basic negative emotion. The basic negative emotions, the fundamental negative emotions are fear, anger, disgust, and sadness. And they all exist for a reason. And interestingly, the human limbic system, this console of tissue that's between 2 and 40 million years ago, it predates Homo sapiens. It exists to turn signals that we get below our level of consciousness into emotions, which are the human language that we can understand. Negative emotions exist for a reason. They're signals that we have perceived a threat. That's what it comes down to.
I love that you had inhibition and activation. That
Well, that's the prefrontal cortex.
Exactly.
The human, it's like its whole job is saying, "Don't do that."
Withdraw.
Yeah. So it's like the prefrontal cortex is the C-suite. That's where the provost of your brain sits, which is the behavioral inhibition system of a university.
Indeed.
The provost. And then the chancellor is the behavioral activation system.
We try to share both.
Your BIS and Daniel's BAS.
We try really hard to balance, but I get your metaphor.
Yeah,
it's working.
And then, of course, the signals that are coming through, the limbic system and its wild emotions are us, the faculty. You think about it that way.
Well, I mean, I think it's that fascinating idea, right? That sees the moment, sees the day, sees the opportunity, often requires tamping down the inhibition, the worry, the concern,
and actually
right?
getting more toward activation. It's interesting because some people, what they find is they're too inhibited, and some people find they're too active. People who have neurodegenerative diseases or they've had some sort of brain pathology where their behavioral inhibition system is damaged.
Yeah.
That's the primary job of making sure that you're not doing things, that you don't get yourself into trouble. And this is, people who are, for example, people who suffer from psychosis, often they don't have a functioning behavioral inhibition system.
Yeah. Or work hard, play hard, right?
Yeah.
Playing a little too hard can have
I've been actually studying that a little bit, and you'll be interested in this because what you find is that people who are interested in extreme sports, they take really a lot of risks. And what we find is that they have different amygdalae than the rest of us. That you've seen this research,
I've heard,
right?
Yes.
So you find that people, if their amygdala is literally too big, not too big, bigger than average, then it'll be activated really easily, and they'll have a hair trigger, and they have to work on their temper, and they have anger management problems. But if it's too small, or if it's underactive, then they can't feel anything.
Yes.
And so they'll do crazy things and take crazy risks.
You have to jump.
You got to do that because you're not going to feel
leap.
alive until you
climb.
jump without a parachute off that thing or whatever it happens to be, right?
Totally fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think a lot about the ways in which institutions like ours that expect so much of our students, right? We have really a wonderful community that goes big and goes hard for things that are difficult, right? This idea, I think you quote President Kennedy at one point in the book about many people really like to do something because it's hard,
Right.
not because it's easy, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But in the course of doing that, do we end up leaning a little too much on the worry end of the spectrum or the inhibitory control end of the spectrum? Defer, right?
Yeah.
And I love that you encourage everybody to schedule time to explore or to be curious or to read or to rest or to laugh, that there's room. And in fact, it's paramount to make that case.
Yeah. I've been working a lot on the essence of leisure of late. And part of the
Great.
reason is because I'm bad at it.
You're bad at leisure.
I'm bad at
You're
leisure.
bad at
I'm
being
bad at
a
leisure.
loafer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the reason is because I didn't understand leisure properly. And so lately I've been going back to the
Arthur
work.
Brooks,
I know.
expert at flaking out. Yeah,
I know.
I can
It's like,
see
I
that
was like,
doesn't
I need to
really-
become a slacker. I mean, I'm learning to be a slacker. And I'll tell my students, I'll say, I'll talk to them about the necessity of actually finding some integration between their work and the rest of their lives. And they'll be like, you want us to be slackers? I'll say, there's nothing I could tell you that would make you into slackers. Strivers are born, is what it comes down to. And I'm a classic striver, and so are you. The trouble with that is that it's all points on the board. And then there's this arrival fallacy that we get into, and there's a lot of problems with happiness for this. So I've gone back to the work of Josef Pieper lately. I've been reading a lot of Josef Pieper, and his most influential book was Leisure, the Basis of Culture, written after the middle of the 20th century. And Pieper talks about what leisure really means, and we get it wrong today. So we think of what leisure, as he would call acedia, which in ancient Greek is this laziness, sloth.
Yeah.
And that's not right. He says that leisure is a serious business. You don't get paid for it, but it's a kind of a self-improvement in more or less three realms: learning new things,
Great.
building relationships, and deepening spiritual ideas. And so becoming more philosophically or spiritually deeper, getting closer to your family and friends, or anybody for that matter, and paying attention to your learning and not doing it for money.
It's
not
great.
doing
It
it
sounds
for
like
fame.
being highly focused and highly attentive.
Yeah.
Just very alive.
And it's just really great, I have to say. And that's a wonderful thing. And that's one of the roles that we can actually play in the university and the ongoing life of students and the communities that we have, is that we can help them participate in a life that has not just the daily grind, but actually has leisure properly understood. And that's how I'm trying to learn how to have a leisure life that's better too.
No, it's great. So I guess one question, since you claim that, that you weren't good at leisure, I would imagine you might claim that you hadn't really gotten a close bead on happiness early.
Yeah, happiness is hard for me. That's why I studied
What
it.
drew you to it, right?
Precisely because it's hard for me. And when I started looking at the studies that the Minnesota researchers were looking at identical twins, the identical twin studies, separated at birth and reunited as adults, identical twins that were adopted into separate families, because this is it's a quasi-experimental way to.
Yeah, there were great 1970s TV shows about this. There's a great documentary.
But of course, there's going to be social scientists like me and you with clipboards following them around, collecting data.
Totally.
And what you find is that 40 to 80% of all their personality traits are genetic, which none of us wants, but, too bad. And happiness. And so somewhere between, low 40s and high 50% of happiness is genetic. Your baseline, how you wake up most days. I mean, some people, they wake up and they're like, it's a great day.
Right, what is it? This Thursday's child, all of those. Yeah.
But, for the rest of us, like gratitude. Gratitude. And I remember seeing that and thinking, okay, my mother did make me unhappy. Or, that my mother was great. But the point is I had gloomy parents.
Characterologically.
I had gloomy parents and gloomy
dysphoric
grandparents and all right. And, I married a Spaniard who's a sunny person. And she said, you're a behavioral scientist. Why aren't you using your PhD for something really, truly useful, like your own happiness? And she had a point. She had a point. And so in my mid-50s, I actually stepped back. I was running this big think tank, and I dedicated the rest of my life to actually retraining, as I mentioned before, mostly to update my toolkit as a social scientist, with the modern neuroscience that really shows us how much of psychology really is biological. That psychology is biology in this very beautiful way, and then marrying it up with the wisdom traditions, but especially the philosophy that I had never studied before.
Yeah, but what's so great is that I find your work is suggesting that while that genetic component is real, that there is so many action steps that we can take to shape our physiological responses to our environment, our ways in which we experience our day, our community, our work, right?
Yeah. And when you know your tendencies, if you know your biological proclivities, then you can tailor your habits appropriately. I mean, it's like the data, for example, are very clear that about half of your tendency to abuse alcohol, genetic. But if you say, hey, both my parents are drunks and all four of my grandparents, and, my great grandfather was a bootlegger, and I don't know, what are the story? We're in Tennessee, so I'm trying to make it local. And it was, and then you say, so I'm doomed. I'm going to drink too much. I say, well, no. I got a special technique for turning that genetic tendency to zero. It's called not drinking.
Yes.
And so the more you know about what your tendencies are, the better you can be with your habits. And this is the beautiful thing about having this wonderful prefrontal cortex. I mean, my dog's prefrontal cortex is wafer thin. And that means when his limbic system, which is pretty similar to mine, by the way, he has emotions too, say, be mad or show love, he can't not. He lives in the space of his animal impulses, but I can actually choose my moral aspirations. That's what this supercomputer allows me to do. But that requires knowledge, and that requires habits. And that's why the life of the mind is so exciting.
Deeply thrilling.
Exactly. It's just the biggest adventure ever.
Totally. I wanted to ask you a little bit, given that you're an award-winning columnist for The Atlantic and The Washington Post, how it's been to put out these weekly newsletters. And I just thought I'd kick it off with one that I especially loved. You recently had a piece about how we might all relax a little around Bad Bunny's halftime show for the Super Bowl. I just loved it.
You texted me or you emailed me about that one, that you actually liked that one. That was controversial.
Well, you drew on really fascinating psychological research about language and belonging, and particularly about how monolingual English speakers can sometimes feel anxious or excluded when they're in a setting where other people are speaking a different language. I think any one of us has experienced this, right? Where that research shows that not understanding what's being said around us can trigger real feelings of discomfort or even threat, that sense of, what am I missing? Am I outside of the circle? But then you totally flip the script. You tell this incredibly great personal story that when you were 24 as a young musician playing in a brass quintet in France, you met the woman who was going to become your wife, this beautiful audience member, from Barcelona, who spoke only Catalan. And this way in which it became exciting and funny and awkward and romantic and full of possibility to not know, right? That not knowing is actually this spark of and thrill of exploration or curiosity.
Yeah.
Of course, I love that because I think of it so much as the foundation of discovery, which is really about what I think a lot of university life is about. Research involves not knowing, right? But it also is really at the heart of our emphasis on Dialogue Vanderbilt, right? What is it that I will learn and that I do not yet know by engaging with you, right?
Completely. No, I completely, and it's just a great example. It's one of the big reasons I'm here at Vanderbilt, because Vanderbilt has this commitment to seeing difference as a source of adventure, even ideological difference. I mean, it's funny because we all talk about diversity and we all talk about difference, but the right kind, like not the kind we don't like people who differ from us politically, God forbid, right? But Vanderbilt takes this seriously, and I love that, because the whole point is that when we model that as scholars, when we model that as academics, of being just thrilled by hearing weird, dangerous stuff, like bring it on. I want more dangerous ideas. I want to feel ideologically unsafe. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
And when young people see that, they say, oh, that's an adventure.
Yeah, discomfort is actually the place we're heading for in a great way. Right?
That was kind of the essence of I'm no, summer of love hippie, of Berkeley in 67 or whatever it was. But the free speech movement was kind of like that. It's like, bring it on, say weird things.
Yeah.
You got some controversial opinion, I'm going to sit down next to you and kind of figure it out. And that's the essence of being a social science researcher, isn't it? And,
totally.
So when I talk to my students about going home for Thanksgiving, and Aunt Marge is going to be at Thanksgiving, and she's going to talk about Trump or something. I say, pretend you're, Margaret Mead. Pretend you're doing an ethnographic study and just be like, that's so interesting. Tell me, why do you think that? Tell me more.
Yeah.
And that's the essence of what it means to be fully alive and to be participating in the competition of ideas, which is fundamental to a free society, but it's fundamental to an exciting life.
We all love to talk, especially those of us who host podcasts. But is language just a tool we use to communicate, or is it something much more powerful? How does language impact politics, identity, access, and evolving technology? Join me in our next episode as Akshaya Saxena, Associate Professor of English at Vanderbilt, and I dig into the fascinating history and future of language. But first, let's get back to my conversation with Arthur. I think it's great to hear you say that it's fundamental to being alive. And I wonder how much you've been thinking about whether it's also fundamental to being human in a time when AI knows everything, right? The sense that actually it's not that we're being outpaced, it's that it's no longer exciting. What's your take on this sense of this deluge of information where knowing versus not knowing, novelty versus familiarity becomes so brightly foregrounded?
We've been always surrounded by questions of why, but also questions of how to and what. And we've accommodated ourselves to trying to find the answers to all these types of questions. And now we have tools that are really, really good at answering questions, but not all of them. What AI is really good at is answering the how to and what questions of life, and horrible at the why questions of life. Humans are we're the only ones that
we're going to hold on
that.
To that portion of the
but that's the life in life.
Yeah.
That's really where the life in life is. I do a lot of work on hemispheric lateralization. Ian McGilchrist's work from Oxford, who talks about the fact that when you and I were kids, we always thought there was hemispheric lateralization. You had artsy
I'm
people,
left-handed, but I'm good at math.
My dad was a mathematician, but my mother was an artist.
Right.
And so one was right and one was left. And that stuff hasn't actually stood
held
up.
Yes.
Yeah. But the new hemispheric lateralization literature talks about the right hemisphere of your brain is largely responsible for the big why questions of life. And then the left side is for the tasks, the how to and what stuff. AI and the exciting technologies that we're discovering and developing are going to be great as an adjunct to the left hemisphere of our brain. But if we use it to substitute for the right side by making it into our buddy or our lover or our therapist, woe be unto us. Because the most interesting questions in life can't be Googled.
Yeah.
And you can't feed them into AI. And that's what AI, I hope, will do, is free us up for the conversations that we need to have with each other about the big why of life. Only that's where the mystery of life comes. That's where the meaning of life actually comes.
And so do you think that's going to be one of those things that a classroom can do that a desktop tutor will never be able to do, is be able to support you or I or our students in tolerating the uncertainty, the discomfort of not knowing?
Absolutely. That's what the ancient Greeks called aporia. Or if you prefer, aporia. Who knows?
Yeah.
Anyway, but aporia is sitting in the discomfort of not knowing. And so Socrates would actually talk about the idea of you need to go away and puzzle, sitting in a state of puzzlement per se. And what we now know happens is that exercises the parts of the brain that you actually need to gain an understanding of the ineffable. That's actually a real problem with the way that we use technology today. So in the 80s or something, or in the Stone Age, in the 1990s, what did people do before they actually could scroll Instagram or look at YouTube Shorts late at night? They would have these unbelievably pretentious dorm room conversations that you would be mortified to hear played back to you. But that's exactly what people needed to find the meaning of life. That's what it came about.
Yeah.
And going home at 11:30 at night before you go to sleep, zoom, zoom, zoom. You've become an AI. No, worse. You've entered the matrix.
Well,
the truth is that one of the reasons that we have a
certainly.
meaning crisis, especially among young adults today, especially among hard-charging, striving young adults today, is because they've been injected into a simulation of real life. And the simulation is more or less what AI can do, which is to say there's nothing more than how to and what questions.
Yeah.
And that's
a great way to zoom out and to reframe the use of AI as a tool rather than as a space that we want to get too stuck in.
If you free up your time from mundane tasks and spend that time engaging in big ideas with the people that you love, you win.
Yeah. I love that very clear message throughout the book, and the sense that if it requires you calculating the value of your hours in terms of what you would have earned or spent, fine, do that. But actually, you can actually make that commitment just on the basis of values and vision and your commitment to human spiritual growth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But you do have to be committed to those big
Yeah.
why questions. You have
Yeah.
to be committed to looking for the mystery and the meaning of life. And that's not easy in a way. I mean, there's a reason that our great grandparents were using their brains the way that they were supposed to, is because they didn't have the opportunity to check out.
Yeah.
They didn't have the opportunity to spend 24 hours a day on the left hemisphere with, using technology to wipe out every ounce of boredom from their lives. So there's no blank space. It's all distraction.
Yeah.
And it's funny. There's a real irony actually that comes from this, which is that the great grandpa raver, he never came home and said, "Honey, I had a panic attack behind the mule today." It's because it wasn't a thing. The HPA axis flooding.
No.
Because his brain, it was working in the way it was intended to work in the late Pleistocene. And his day from moment to moment was actually pretty boring, but his life wasn't boring.
No, it was. That's right.
And now you can never be bored from moment to moment and have an unbelievably boring life.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah. The level of dysphoria that might trigger is
exactly right. And that's when we can't
huge.
find the meaning of life. That's the meaning crisis in a nutshell.
I'm glad you're here.
Me too. I'm
at
super
Vanderbilt
excited. I can't
help
wait
us
to get
out of
started
that
with the
challenge.
students and with
That's
the faculty. And this is Sibel, this is the place to be.
Awesome. What drew you, honestly, Arthur? What was the, is it the zeitgeist? Is it the values? What part of Vanderbilt made you feel that this was the right place for you?
I'm an incredibly lucky person and have opportunities to do different things. And I look around and I'm always looking for the next frontier of adventure and excitement. And for me, that's intellectual, that's moral, that's social and emotional, intellectual, not just intellectual excitement. And I find here a community. And by the way, excellence, great scholars, top students, highly selective. Yeah. I want that. I absolutely want that. But when it comes to the life of the mind, that's table stakes. I want a place that's really going to excite me. Time is short. I want to go to the place that's really going to light me up and where I can actually play a part in building the next generation of people who have a sense of that kind of excitement as well.
I love that. I think that's exactly right. The sense that life is short. There's a lot we want to be able to know and do and discover, right? That is super highly energizing.
Yeah.
In terms of the disciplines that you want to connect with or the students that you want to connect with, what's your dream state for being here?
Yeah. My dream state is actually understanding that there's a seamless garment between all of the disciplines that we're talking about. In point of fact, and it's actually the story of my own life as an academic and as a scholar. I started as a classical musician,
right,
and then as an economist, as a social scientist, and then retooling my skills the way that I've had. I found that I'm looking at the same issues. I'm looking at the same things it's like looking through a prism from different angles.
Love it.
And that's the kind of community I want to belong to. And so there's almost nothing that's going on at Vanderbilt that I'm not interested in. And I want to bring people together around the biggest things in life, around how we can, with the tools that we're being equipped with here, to lift people up and bring them together in bonds of happiness and love using science and ideas. That's what I want to do.
It's so great. And it immediately makes me think of a series that we've been holding in New York City, and one was on collaboration between the Blair School of Music and the Divinity School, right, on jazz, right?
Nice.
And that sort of energy around that focus on the seamless garment between what we would not necessarily automatically put into the same room or on the same stage.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, my dream is actually to do some sort of a program where you randomly take out of a hat academics from two disciplines, and you put them in together in a room, and then they talk to each other until they actually find out what they're both mutually interested in, and their disciplines actually make it clearer because they're looking at it from two different angles.
Great. This is
would be so cool, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would hope that they would choose, but we could pick them.
Yeah. It's like, you're up.
It's definitely a great plan for whether it's a dinner series or a way to connect with students and with faculty. What a great invitation. What a great opportunity for people to come to the same table.
For sure.
Yeah.
I love it. And this is the kind of place that's making a lot of news nationally and internationally. It's the kind of place where that kind of thing might just happen.
Arthur, I love it. What would you like us to know or think as we close? Today's been an amazing conversation.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and I hope it's the beginning of a whole lot of wonderful conversations we're able to actually have at Vanderbilt, and I'm thrilled to actually be part of. I think it's important for us to remember. I mean, I've been in higher education since I was a baby and before. I mean, I'm a third generation academic, and to remember that this is our opportunity to not just to create adventure for ourselves, but to bring adventure in the best possible sense to other people,
Yeah.
and to keep the spirit of adventure in
Yeah.
exactly everything that we're doing, to look at what we're trying to learn as this frontier and with an unsure future,
Yeah.
to be sure. But that's the most exciting thing about it of all. And if we can maintain that with just enough fear, but not be debilitated by that fear, and certainly not to cut off our willingness and ability to listen to things that are strange to us, then really there's no end to the possibilities of the goodness that we can actually bring to other people.
So love that. The absolute antithesis of fusty and ivory tower.
I know.
And
because that's the
removed,
best. And that's, what people don't know about life in our world is that it's just the best thing.
Yeah. No, it truly is. Arthur, this conversation highlights something so powerful. I think that, fulfillment, that flourishing, that happiness are not just abstract ideals.
Right.
They're not something that we wait for later. They're not something that's true only for other people. They're grounded in intention, in community, in conversations like these, in curiosity, in lifelong search for adventure and seizing of adventure. I love that. We are so thrilled to welcome you to Vanderbilt, to our academic community, to our wider community in Nashville, to this part of the world. And we are so grateful for the perspective that you bring. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me in Nashville at Vanderbilt and going forward for the adventure we're going to have together.
It's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
The Quantum Potential podcast comes from Vanderbilt University. I'm your host, Sibel Raver, Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs with Vanderbilt University. Thank you to our guest, Arthur C. Brooks, William R. Keenan Jr. Chair in Medicine, Health, and Society at Vanderbilt, for joining us today. This episode was edited and mixed by the team at Sound On, Sound Off. You can learn more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. For more information about quantum potential, go to vanderbilt.edu/quantum potential. Thank you for joining us today for the Quantum Potential podcast. Stay tuned for more conversations with the thinkers and innovators reshaping our world. I'm Sibel Raver, and this has been Quantum Potential.